Welcome on in, guys. Tobin here with you. Thanks for checking out the channel. You're looking fantastic today, if I do say so myself. Miami Heat, they are off on this evening. They'll be back against the Phoenix Suns Friday night, and hopefully can end with a winning road trip. But I wanted to get to a story near and dear to my heart that I have not talked about on this channel yet. I have talked about it on my radio show, and that is, of course, the retirement of a legend. The legend, the dragon, Goran Dragic. Now, Gogi is one of my all-time favorites. He's not only just a badass player. I've had some really, really fun interactions. I would say he's one of my favorite players to interview in Heat history, whether it be on the radio show, interacting in the locker room, just an all-time great dude. But I just always thought he was just such a savage competitor. You know, like this guy, one of the things that I really respect about Goran is this guy signed up for something with the Miami Heat that he really did not get a chance to do until Jimmy Butler got here. And Heat fans who maybe, you know, are off that past LeBron era, or maybe you fell in love during the Big Three, or who knows? I know that, we can skew young sometimes on the internet and those who are watching this channel, but if you think back, those were interesting times because, some people were just very appreciative of LeBron leaving. I was more on the Team Petty side. I really wanted the Miami Heat to have a crack at beating LeBron James. It really meant a lot. It meant something to me as a Heat fan. He ultimately got his last laugh. He got to the finals every year. He won a championship. But, man, those matchups when LeBron were here were fantastic. And the Miami Heat really were trying to make moves so they could compete. And the biggest move that they probably made, the biggest swing that they probably took at competing with LeBron was when Pat Riley traded for Goran Dragic. And the thing that I just love about him is, do you guys remember this summer where Damian Lillard couldn't really make a stink? He did it, but wasn't willing to play the complete bad guy in the media. Now, to be fair, Damian did get kind of handcuffed by the league, saying they were going to fine him. I had heard that he couldn't even retweet stuff on social media because he was worried about the league fining him and things like that. But Goran Dragic went to Phoenix and went to reporters, and they had a lot of point guards. They had Brandon Knight, I think Eric Bledsoe, and they had him, and he wasn't getting the role that he wanted. He was sick of Phoenix and their whole act. And so he went into the media and made a stink. Goran Dragic went into a media and says, I don't trust the Phoenix Suns. And just completely made a stink, nuked it, and got himself moved to the Miami Heat. Many of you were probably listening to the Levitard show when it happened and how crazy those guys went. And it was on. I mean, Goran, D. Wade, Chris Bosh, Hassan Whiteside. You really thought this is going to be the unit. This is going to be the team that does it. And of course, little do we know, moments, minutes, hours later, whatever it was a very, very short time, Chris Bosh, we've discovered that he has blood clots. His season is over, and then subsequently his career would end up being over after a comeback attempt that Goran never got the chance to do. Also, in the midst of Goran Dragic being there, D-Wade ended up leaving. And it was really Gogi with this ragtag group of Dion Waiters and James Johnson, and the guy was really thought upon as the leader of the team. At one point was named one of the Heat captains along with UD and I believe James Johnson. And, his running mate, Dion Waiters, had even said this on his Instagram on one of his retirement posts. Let me see if I can get this for you guys. But Dion had said something to the effect, if I can't find the exact thing here, he had said, my favorite running mate of all time, 7-Eleven, always open. And that team just does have a special place in people's heart. It really does, just because of the tenacity that they had. They could have gone in a direction of tanking. They did not. They ended up finishing at 500, a tiebreaker away from not making the postseason. And, if you think to this year, it would have been kind of crazy to think of a Dion Waiters, Goran Dragic-led team to make some noise in that playoffs or spook some teams. But, that was the kind of run that they were on, that backcourt. They were incredible. And Goran just always in the midst of this, always the professional, always just so awesome in his competitiveness with his friendships off the court, whether it be with Birdman Anderson, where they were Ragnar and Floki on the from the show Vikings, or just like this dude would literally put his chiclets on the line, put his eyes on the line, would sometimes get fouls called on him. But the runs this guy could get on when Goran was at his best, that just iron shoulder he could throw into people, a lot more physical than people gave him credit for. Then, of course, had that nasty left-handed stroke, which could get going and really just carry a run by himself. He was just so much fun to watch. I just enjoyed watching when this guy would be at his best and some of the stuff that he could do in the paint at his size and pull off. And then, on top of it, then is looked at and is just like, hey, he dealt with some injuries, and then his role had to change because the Miami Heat were making moves. D. Wade, he had a couple of moments in the playoffs that will, I think, stand out to a lot of people pre-Jimmy Butler, one of them being in a series that I ended up losing a bet to an Australian member of parliament because in this year, Goran Dragic was named an all-star. Now, it was a lot of reserves. A lot of people were checking out. That'll happen in the All-Star game. So Goran ends up making it ahead of Ben Simmons, who I think it was Ben Simmons' second year playing. And before he actually was, a laughingstock, which he is now. And Goran, minding his own business, being an all-star, took a stray from this dude, Tim Watts, who was an Australian member of parliament. And he gets there and he goes, he's insulted. Ben Simmons, Australian. And he's like, who would want to see Ben Simmons who would want to see Goran Dragic in an all-star game over Ben Simmons? Well, this did not sit well with old Tobes. And eventually the playoff series would shift and we'd get a showdown between Heat and Sixers. And I really wanted the Heat to win that series. I mean, it was a fun series. There were a lot of moments I think Heat fans remember, but it ultimately wasn't very competitive. They got gentlemen swept. Shoe on the other foot now, eh? But there was, of course, Justice Winslow stepping on Joel Embiid's mask. There was a lot of fisticuffs back and forth. I remember Marco Bellinelli just would not stop hitting shots, and Dario Saric would not stop hitting shots for the Philadelphia 76ers. They were shooting the mother bleeping lights out. But Goran Dragic did step to Ben Simmons in this where he slapped him upside the head. Ben Simmons did nothing, of course. But the bet that I had was if the Heat would have won that series, Tim Watts would have had to wear a Goran Dragic jersey on the floor of Australian Parliament. And because the Heat did lose, I ended up having to go in front of the arena in a Ben Simmons jersey and a kangaroo outfit. And the sign, I believe, said that Ben Simmons made Goran Dragic his little Joey, which was not great. But I do know that Goran Dragic was aware of the bet originally and was appreciative of the efforts. And then we talked about it at at a media day. I think the next year we got to discuss it because, Goran was like still beside himself with this. He's like, why would you waste politicians, political time talking about me making the All-Star game? He was not happy with it. Goran also has a Game 7 in the first round against the Charlotte Hornets that was the only Heat playoff series win after the Big Three left up until Jimmy Butler got there, I believe. D. Wade, of course, had the magic Game 6 where he just completely took over and looked like vintage D. Wade, and of course got into the face of purple shirt guy. And then Game 7, that was the Goran Dragic show. Goran Dragic looked absolutely fantastic. It was the best version of that Heat team. They would end up going into the next round, and they would lose in 7 games. I think it was 7 games to the Toronto Raptors in a back and forth. Hassan and Valanciunas both ended up getting hurt, and he of course had the Kyle Lowry heave in that game, in that series. He ended up winning that game, but he had that crazy ass shot where he was really going through a lot of stuff. So that was 2016, right before D-Wade, of course, would end up leaving. Goran would, be with 7-Eleven for a year, and then of course D-Wade would eventually come back. And it was just, but that team was like the best version, but that team was supposed to have Chris Bosh. That team was supposed to have a huge piece in it, and the Heat just never could be whole because they always had this big salary cap hang on it. So definitely a bummer. But Gogi was supposed to be this final piece to a true contender, and because of the Chris Bosh injury, never really got to be there. And then finally, we get to this point where Goran gets Jimmy Butler in town. And remember, his role had changed with that team. That was the team that Kendrick Nunn started. And Spo had this big talk with Goran because Goran was dealing with some knee stuff. And he was saying to him, hey, I want you to come off the bench. We're gonna work you in limited minutes and have these spurts. And we think that's what's going to be best for you. And it wasn't an easy conversation for Goran. It's not one that he loved to have. But they ended up doing it. And in the midst of that year, after D-Wade retires, and we get all the goosies from that, but the Heat didn't make the playoffs, and you're kind of sick of losing. You have Goran Dragic here, who's on, at that point, the last year of his deal. And he has this chance to be part of a team that has Jimmy Butler that nobody thinks is going to do any real contending. A lot of people were mocking that team. Why would you go to that team? Who are these guys that Jimmy Butler? Remember, everybody would mock Jimmy Butler because Jimmy Butler was coming down here to retire. And wouldn't you know it, man? That was really a year that was big for me because I was doing the morning show and I decided that I really wanted to be covering the team on a home basis for a lot of the games. And that was before COVID hit, so the locker room was open. And man, let me tell you, that team and their vibes were just, it was amazing. The chemistry that Jimmy Butler and Gogi would have to each other. They sat about 2 lockers away from each other. Mind you, this was also a team that had Dion Waiters disgruntlement. Didn't matter. Like, everybody just loved each other. There was always fun. There was always jokey jokes flying around the locker room, which you're getting a little bit more of that this day and age, but it's just it's never like it's been since that first year with Jimmy Butler. I think Jimmy was kind of just happy to be in a place. He had just signed this big deal. He hadn't gotten on the finals run. He wasn't playoff Jimmy quite yet. And, him and Gogi, man, like it was, there would be times where like Jimmy was actually speaking Slovenian to Goran. And it was just an awesome thing to see. It was awesome to see Goran Dragic really get this opportunity to be on a team that was doing some big things. But that wasn't even going to be what was his huge moment. His huge moment in this year was going to be when we got to the postseason. And, of course, one of the things that probably did help, I won't ignore that the bubble did have some benefits. And I think one of the biggest things was probably health of a guy like Goran, a guy who had dealt with some leg injuries and was getting older. This guy didn't have to travel, and he also got months off, and he comes into this bubble fresh as a daisy, and he was insanely good in the run to the finals. He was so unstoppable. The confidence that he had in his shot was just tearing defenses apart. Ends up being the leading scorer on a team that went through the Pacers, the Bucks in 5, and of course dealt with the Celtics in 6. They didn't have an answer for him. And all of a sudden, Goran Dragic, who everybody got to see with, I go to Big Face Coffee, but it's closed, man. And, he's apparently stealing. He's the only guy who can get free coffee out of Jimmy Butler because he just tricks. And this has been a thing known with Goran is with his teammates is he'll cheat. Because if he doesn't like, a hand he's dealt with in cards, he'll pretend that he doesn't speak English. So I really just think the man has had just such an incredible impact in his time with this franchise. And he has this incredible run to the NBA Finals, and then the most cruel thing in the world happens. He has this all-time career moment, and he busts a ligament in his foot, and he can't play. And I'll never forget the Zoom call. It was either the next day or the day after, but, they were doing all Zooms. Goran's like literally like he's in tears and he's like asking God, like, why, you ask, like, why does this happen? You don't want to be selfish, but you're like, oh, come now. Why now? Why get me here? And this is where it happens. And I just felt crushed for the guy because he had finally got to be on the contender that he thought he was here to be on. And he was destroying teams. He was killing it. Even really more so than Jimmy was. Jimmy, of course, had his moments, and Jimmy was important to get in the finals, and Jimmy has the iconic moments in the finals because he has no Goran Dragic. He's trying to will his team against LeBron, so those will always be the most iconic memories that you have of that run. But what Goran did against Milwaukee and what Goran did against Boston was nothing short of awesome. And, right there with the Bam block and all that stuff, he was huge. And you have him, Jimmy, and Bam as the bad boys in the bubble. And for him to just have that happen to him was so crushing, So I go down this retrospective because Goran today was in Slovenia. We're also, by the way, the dude's a friggin' basketball hero there. It's Luka now, but Goran, was the modern era guy before Luka and was the MVP of the team that won EuroLeague. Which is, I mean, come on, dude. Like that, Slovenia, for that to happen it was unbelievable. I remember having him on the day after when it was Luka and Goran, and all of Slovenia had descended upon the AAA at the time, and they're all just like chanting for these guys, and the back and forth was just so much fun, and man, I really, really enjoyed that. And so he comes out today, and apparently he tells the media that he only was going to come back if he got to deal with the Miami Heat. Now, if you guys don't remember, I had Goran on in the summertime in the NBA Finals, and we talked about this. Like, this was the place that he wanted to be, and I really wish that they would have brought him in. All respect to Drew Smith, I just wish that they would have gone with Goran. And I get it. They already had Kyle Lowry, who they were dealing with some, drama or question marks with. But I just thought, man, I would have loved Goran to get his one last swan song with the Heat. And so Goran, he says, quote, "I'll be honest." And if Goran Dragic says that, if I'm honest, or I will be honest, if you know that, if you know, you about to get some honesty. He said, I had offers from Europe. This is from Shandell Richardson, by the way, from SI.com, which he told Basket News. He says, "I'll be honest. I had offers from Europe, from Milan, Madrid, Barcelona. I never wanted to go back to Europe. I wouldn't want to be without my children living in the U.S. for a year. The only option was the Miami Heat, with whom I was in talks. In the end, it didn't work out because they had too many players under contract." Sucks. Like I wish that this would have been, I wish this would have been possible to have him. But I love that guy, man. I love him as a player, and I do this to let you know, I truly do believe the guy's numbers should be retired by the Heat. I do think number 7 belongs in the Raptors. And I got into this argument the other day with Leroy about him being arguably the best point guard in Heat history, him and Tim Hardaway. The numbers are pretty close. I don't even think that that's even a good argument, whether or not he's the best at his position to get him in. First of all, I will say, as a franchise, I think the Heat have pretty flimsy jersey retirement rules. Shaq's up there. He played like 3 seconds, even though he won a championship and he was an iconic star. It's not like the Heat go just by longevity. They go and have these impacts. And there's other people I do believe should be up there. I used to get, Zazzle used to be in this campaign with Glenn Rice. Glenn Rice deserves to be up there. There is Heat history before Pat Riley. And I think G Money deserves to be up in the Rafters too. They haven't given away 41, by the way, which is odd. Like, they've gone all these years and they've never retired 41. But I don't think anybody's worn it besides him since he's been traded. At least to my knowledge, I don't think anybody has. And so G Money believes he believes he should be up there. But Goran, he's not the big three era, and he's not the number one star of the Jimmy Butler era. That's going to be Jimmy, and it's probably going to be Bam. This will be known as, I guess, the Jimmy Bam era. And I imagine 13 is going to be in the Rafters one day, and 22 will be in the Rafters one day. Maybe you need to save some numbers. But I believe for a guy to be here and always consistently be the second or best player on his team for the time that he was here, I believe that stands on it as a merit to get in. Being an all-star, which, non-D-Wade, big three all-stars like Goran has a distinction with his franchise. And I do think that finals run in 2020, you look up and see that Eastern Conference championship, and you say that guy was, up until the finals, arguably the best guy that they had on that team. And I think the thing that drives me nuts about this, because a lot of people scoff at me with this argument, right? They say, Tobin, this is stupid. Why do you think you're in the bag for Goran Dragic? And I admit bias, and I admit that's true. But nobody would argue with me about this if Goran Dragic was a champion. Nobody would argue with me about this if Goran Dragic had a ring. And so we're going to argue about this because Goran Dragic's foot exploded. It wasn't his fault. It's not like he stunk up the joint. The guy goes out there, he suffers an injury, and we're going to act like that's not part of the story. Like, look, Chris Bosh, two-time champion, I get it, but like immediately after he was done, they were like, dude goes up in the Rafters. Why? Yeah, Chris Bosh was the third best player on a championship team. But also vibes. Like the guy just he meant something to the fan base too. And he was an all-star, and he did bring feel good, and he did stick around when LeBron left and stuck with D-Wade, and I get it. But also part of Chris Bosh's story is like, hey, what could have been? And I do think that with Goran, it's a little bit of like, this guy never got the opportunity to play with the two guys next to him, or who would be next to him in those Rafters, at the powers that he thought he would. But he stuck around, he stuck through it, and eventually got his chance to shine on the big stage. And the dude was a monster. He was an absolute shark. He was a killer. And I just think he deserves to be in the Rafters for the Miami Heat. I truly, truly believe that. Whether it happens, I don't know. I would say probably my guess on it is no, because, people will say, oh, come on, Tobin, we're going to put Bam up there and Haslam up there, and Jimmy's going to go up there one day, and LeBron's going to go up there one day, and you got to hold on to some numbers, I guess. I get you, but hell, man, I really wish that guy got one more run with the Heat, and I do, in my opinion, Gogi, you deserve your number in the Rafters, man. So congratulations on just an incredible career with so many runs, with so many great memories, with so much fun. It was just a delight to watch him play basketball. It was a privilege to interact with the guy. Getting a chance to have that fun moment when he came back with Chicago last opening day, and being in the dragon costume and how much he dug that was so badass. And he's a badass. I mean, the dude's just a badass player. So I'm happy that he got to, I guess, close this chapter and is getting his flowers in his country as he deserves. But I believe that the Heat should give him some more flowers eventually down the road. It doesn't have to be immediately. It doesn't have to be this year. It could be. They kind of waited on Timmy, right? But like, I do think it should happen one day. I really, really do. I believe 7 belongs up in those Rafters, and man, I really, really enjoyed watching this guy's Heat career. So congratulations, Goran.